Okay, hello everybody. This is Noma-Prime, and I figured that I would do a kind of supplemental series to my Legacy of the Duelist series, wherein I go through each of the character decks that I use and how I put them together. So this this one is going to be about Yugi's deck, obviously, if you've read the video title, but it's also going to serve as kind of an introduction to the process overall. Um, because one thing that I definitely want to be clear and understood is that these were not put together just by going to Yugipedia, looking at the list of cards, and like popping them into Legacy of the Duelist. Like this, the process was significantly more substantial than that. Uh, so just kind of start with, I know that copying the decks of anime characters has been a topic of interest among players for probably as long as the game of Yu-Gi-Oh has existed. I remember as a kid how badly I wanted to put together like Yugi's deck or later on Jaden's deck because like who doesn't love elemental heroes? Like they're so cool. They're bad, but they're fun. Um anyway, so yeah, there are a lot of people that have done takes on the character decks, but I feel like they've never really come at it with any sense of academic rigor or like critical analysis of what they're looking at. And that's really what I aimed to do here. So before you can really start putting together decks for these characters, there's a set of questions that I think have to be answered. So first is what cards have they been confirmed to have in their deck at any given time? What cards were available to them at the time they were putting their deck together? What were the rules of the game that they were playing by? And how would that impact putting the deck together? And what other restrictions might have existed? So, like ban lists, how rare certain cards might have been, whether their deck building rules are the same as ours. Are they allowed to just have 3 copies of any card or not? Um, and all of these questions have to be looked at and examined on their own before we can get to the final product of the deck. So, for that first question of what cards are confirmed in their deck, I mean that's reasonably straightforward. I still put a lot of extra effort into that for these character decks that I feature here. Um, so the first thing, obviously, you have to divide the anime into time periods, and I will clarify here also. These are specifically the anime decks. I do plan to cover the manga decks later because I think the manga is more balanced. And if you're hearing my cat scream at me, well, I'd apologize, but everybody loves cats, so um, so the first thing that you have to do is divide the anime into kind of periods where their decks might have changed. Um, so like for Yugi, his deck probably changed after Weevil threw out the Exodia cards. His deck would have changed between Duelist Kingdom and Battle City. His deck changed before, like between the Battle City tournament and the Battle City finals. It changed before Waking the Dragons. It changed before the Grand Championships. It changed. You create these time frames that you're working in. And then from there, I went through every duel um, turn by turn to determine what cards he played, what cards were specifically summoned or activated, versus which cards maybe were only played face down and never activated, or discarded as a cost, or just showed up in the hand and were never played. Um, because one thing that you notice if you start if you pay attention to the anime, and this is especially problematic before like episode 22, wherever it is that Yugi and Kaiba have their first like dual disc duel with like the spinning discs. is that they didn't pay a lot of attention. The animators did not pay a lot of attention to the cards in the hand, and cards that did not specifically get activated. But for that, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, they play a card, it's in the deck. If we see it in their hand, it's probably in the deck. If it's shown like on a table when they're putting their deck together, it might be in the deck. Yeah, and we can kind of get a lot of information that way. Then the second question is one that I think this was the one that took the most work, of what cards were available to them at the time of putting their decks together. So the big thing here is that there's actually a strong chronological correlation between the anime and the manga and the card releases in the OCG. This is actually especially apparent with more modern series because they've very much leaned into this idea that this is a commercial for a card game. They are trying to advertise and show off the cards that they want to sell. And so there's a strong correlation between, the cards that are being released right now and the cards that are showing up in the anime. This wasn't quite as strong in the original series, but there was still that correlation because the manga and the OCG were kind of developing alongside each other. It's actually really interesting if you look into it. But so for that, I actually took all of the data, all of the first appearances of every card, and which arc that happened in, and created tables comparing these with the set releases in the OCG to find this chronological correlation. I don't really feel like going into significantly more detail than that because it's a mess, and I don't want to deal with it anymore, and I don't think any of you really care that much to hear about it. The important part for right now is that for Duelist Kingdom, that benchmark is March 23rd, 2000. Anything that released on or before March 23rd, 2000 in the OCG, as well as any card that appeared in the anime, obviously, during the Duelist Kingdom arc, would have been available to these characters. The last two, the gameplay rules. So for Duelist Kingdom, a lot of what I put together was based on observations from the anime, but also since I've been reading the manga, I've been actually taking pictures of every single time they talk about the rules. So I've been able to compile an actually like significant list of rules that can be put together into something a little more reasonable. So Duelist Kingdom is not as mysterious as it sounds or as it seems sometimes. Nobody's really cheating. It's just different because Kazuki Takahashi was tasked with designing an entire card game by himself. Which, gosh, that's hard, but at the same time, props to him, really. But then the last one. So one thing that I want to immediately get out of the way is that for the most part, I am operating under the assumption that cards are limited to one copy per deck on the whole. There are exceptions that short version is I would direct you all to Trinity Format as far as looking at the rules of how these decks were put together, because that's what I used as the basis. In Trinity Format, you can only have one copy of each card. And because of this, they actually lower the deck limit to 30 cards, but that wouldn't be canon, so we don't do that. We keep it at 40, but for every 5 cards over 30, you are allowed to have an extra copy of a card. With some exceptions, because it's a little more complicated than that, but I want to try to keep this simple because we're already like 10 minutes in and I haven't even talked about the deck yet. So with all of this stated, so we have basically single copies of every card, limited to cards that released March 23rd, 2000 or before, and taking every card that was played by the character, and we're going to start. So for Yugi, actually, let me take a look. We're looking at episodes 1 through 53. Because he gets new cards in episode 53, but he doesn't change his deck until at least the next episode. So all of the cards that he played, I actually have in a table right here. So we're just going to go ahead and drop them in. I do not immediately have a reference of where all these cards first appeared, but we're just going to put them in quick as we can. And while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to talk about Catapult Turtle. Catapult Turtle is actually really neat in the in the manga in particular. The way that it worked is that you would tribute a monster. Well, okay, so it would boost a monster's attack points by like 500 by launching it at the an opponent's monster. So in effect, what this meant is that a monster gained 500 attack points until the end of the battle phase, where it would then be destroyed, and the card's owner would take damage equal to half of its attack points. It's bizarre, but it's kind of neat how that works. And is very different from what we see here. Now, so far, I don't think we should be seeing anything that would be surprising to anybody. Most of this is pretty straightforward. Now, one thing that I would mention, and I might actually try to do this here, is that in the anime and the manga, ritual monsters were in the extra deck and required specific tributes in order to be summoned. So to summon Blackluster Soldier, you would have to tribute Gaia the Fierce Knight and other monsters that maybe followed some other set of rules if you're looking at the manga, or just that whose levels add up to 8 or more. So basically Gaia the Fierce Knight plus one other monster if you're looking at the anime. So let's just go ahead and drop these. And I'm putting these in the side deck because he did not have them for most of the manga and anime, so I'm not going to just drop them into the deck. And if you notice here, Horn Imp is OCG exclusive, so I will talk about that in a little bit if you're interested in putting a deck together in the TCG using the cards that you own. But Karibo's also fun in Duelist Kingdom, just because of the way that the things worked in Duelist Kingdom. Yeah, the whole like, oh, Karibo explodes on things. Like, all right, yeah, sure. I mean, but let's see. We've got Rude Kaiser. Again. Ooh, it's not wanting to load. It is not wanting to load these pictures now. That's fun. Got Silver Fang. Summon Skull. There we go. There's the pictures. Torike. Okay, and then one that might surprise people because it only showed up one time. Zombie Warrior. We're gonna talk about Zombie Warrior here in a minute, also. Because we're also going to talk about substitutions. So let's see, we've got Blacklist Soldier, Blacklist Ritual, which, like I said, normally those would go in the extra deck, but we can't really do that on Dueling Book or in Legacy of the Duelist because they are playing specifically by TCG rules. So let's see. One thing that's also really interesting if you get into the manga is how many of these cards just like don't show up in the manga. Because the duels were a lot cleaner and tighter in the manga. Also, here's another card that I want to talk about real quick: is Dark Hole. He never plays this actually in Duelist Kingdom. He plays it in the short filler set of like 3 or 5 episodes that like virtual reality magic quest thing where it's implied that they are using the decks that they had in Duelist Kingdom just to do different stuff, just to like interact with the virtual reality world instead. Now, Spell Shattering Arrow is another one I want to talk about because Spell Shattering Arrow is in Japanese called Living Arrow, and Living Arrow is one of those cards in the manga and anime that had a really whack effect that they did not even attempt to bring into the TCG OCG. They instead just made up a new effect for it, and in the TCG they ended up calling it Spell Shattering Arrow because of the effect, but it has the same name, so I am including it for that, because as far as the OCG is concerned, that is Living Arrow. Now, a quick explanation of Living Arrow for anyone who is not familiar. The effect of Living Arrow in the manga is that it allows you to play a spell card on your opponent's monster as if it is one of your own monsters, which is where the fuse it basically it let Yugi super polymerization Kaiba's Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. It's not as crazy a card as it first seems, but now Soul Release, thank you, anime, comes from his duel against Rebecca Hawkins. It's a card that he plays, and because of the way that the episode is framed, any card that was so it was also shown that his grandpa played it in the same duel, which meant his grandpa put it in the deck, and then Yugi played it later, so we have to conclude that it stayed in the deck the entire time. Even though it's just not a good card. It was useful in that one episode against that one strategy, and disgusting. I hate it. But okay, we're almost done with the canon inclusions. We've got Horn of Heaven. Horn of Heaven is another one that he didn't play in the manga, but because they added that duel with Bakura to replace the fact that they didn't do the evil D&D game from the manga in the anime. So Not that Horn of Heaven is actually a terrible card. I mean, Trap Hole is generally better. Probably, with the like one exception that Horn of Heaven will help against special summons, but you know. Okay, and then we've got Shift and Spellbinding Circle. Okay. So then from here, the things to talk about, I think, are the like substitutions and changes. So things that maybe they work differently in the manga versus in the manga and anime versus the TCG. So one example here is Zombie Warrior was a main deck monster. So instead of just putting in Zombie Warrior and making him have Skull Servant and Battle Warrior like he would need to in order to play it, we are going to instead put in the card the 13th Grave, which has the exact same stats as Zombie Warrior, except it's a main deck monster. Now, because this card only appeared in the one duel against Pegasus, it was singled out by his Millennium Eye, so it was plot relevant, so it did matter. But then Yugi didn't play it, and it never showed up again. And if you remember, I said that he changed his deck after Weevil threw out Exodia. So if you don't want to include the 13th Grave in your deck list, then you don't have to. Now, for Horn Imp and Torike, so those, if you are playing in the TCG, those cards have not been printed in the TCG. So I spent some time to try to find the best substitutions for them. And for Horn Imp, the closest I could find to match its stats, prioritizing type and attribute with level, attack, and defense being somewhat secondary, but still trying to match as close as possible. The card that I found was Dark King of the Abyss. It's level 3 instead of level 4, has 1200 attack instead of 13, and 800 instead of 1000 for defense. But it's a close enough substitution that if you're wanting to build this deck in the TCG, that is a card that you can use. The other is, for Torike, is the card Wolf, where the only substantial difference in terms of stats, at least, is that it has 200 more defense than Torike. Now, of course, this is nothing to do with the aesthetics. The aesthetics on these cards are something else, and I really, really wish they would just print them in the TCG. But, not really anything I can do about that. Now, if you've been watching my Legacy of the Duelist stuff, you will have noticed that there are a couple of cards missing. Actually, a lot of cards missing. Oh, I also forgot Gaia the Dragon Champion. That belongs in here. Also, technically, Beaskull Dragon and Dragon Master Knight, technically. But one thing also to keep in mind is that oh my goodness, I just can't type. Is that the extra deck wasn't really a thing exactly. Fusion cards didn't exist in Duelist Kingdom. You would play Polymerization, and if the cards were compatible, it would summon a particular monster. If you've played Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, one could argue that it works something like that. Not exactly like that, but something like that, where certain cards are compatible, certain cards are incompatible. This is explained a little bit more in the manga when Yugi does his fused Mammoth Graveyard with Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon bit. So there are a couple of cards that I'm going to add now, mostly out of personal preference, just because, well, I like it this way, and there is some canon support for it. So, what we're talking about here is first, Goddess with the Third Eye. So, Goddess with the Third Eye is a fusion substitute monster. So, what that means is that it will take the place of any fusion material. I mean, if you're for a fusion summon. So, the reason I include this is because a significant number of Yugi's cards, of Yugi's monsters, are half of a fusion monster. He also has polymerization just for Gaia the Dragon Champion, which is bad. So he has Summon Skull, Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress #1, Silver Fang, Feral Imp, Giant Soldier of Stone, and Blackluster Soldier that are all one half of a fusion monster, but he doesn't have their corresponding fusion material. So, I figure we drop in this fusion substitute monster, and then we can suddenly include all of those fusion monsters. So, if I remember correctly, let's see. We've got Mystical Sand for Giant Soldier of Stone, Kaiser Dragon. Let's see. What all did I just say? Okay, Summon Skull. So we already have Black Skull Dragon. Kaiser Dragon for... Okay, Flower Wolf. For Silver Fang. Let's see. Feral Imp. Oh my goodness, what is that one called? Feral Imp. No, okay, won't bring it up that way. Oh goodness. No. Oh my goodness. I can't remember right now. Ah, there it is. Road Spectre of Dun. There it is. There it is. And then Dragon Master Knight. I think that's... Yes, I believe that's all of them. Now, there's one other monster that I like to include that it's... The grounds for its inclusion are somewhat shaky, to be honest. I have reasons for it. So, there are two cards that I like to add personally. So we have Meteor Dragon and Meteor Black Dragon. The reason for including these, I mean, one is just because it's a powerful card that doesn't show up in the anime very often. It's an old card. Meteor Dragon also has further synergy with Red Eyes, so it improves that aspect of the relationship between Yugi and Joey, just providing more like thematic synergy for them. But also, with the fusion substitute monster, he's now able to summon Meteor Black Dragon, which is a big, powerful monster. Gives him actually one way to just overpower Blue Eyes. But the last bit here is that he did play it in the 1999 Toei movie, which is not canon to, like, anything, but it is technically canon evidence that he has played Meteor Dragon and Meteor Black Dragon. So, I'm doing it. I like it that way. If you disagree, feel free to let me know. And don't include it in your deck if you don't want to. And since this is based on the anime, it is a bit of a mess. You can see that he's got almost 50 cards here. Which is a lot. And really, I would maybe just go ahead and add another polymerization, because we definitely can, even with the limitations that we have. And this would be the complete anime version Yugi Duelist Kingdom deck. So that's it for this video. Let me know what you think, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Um, until then, see you next time when I do my next stream.